Hello, welcome to Data Talks. Payment of bribes, illegal political campaign financing, cartel behavior, overbilling of public purchases or of construction works. Those are some corrupt activities that public administration all over the world must protect themselves from.
The fight against corruption is something that unites countries all over the world. Even though the phases of corruption in Brazil and Germany might be different, similar challenges, of course, to different degrees can be found in both countries. Just recently, corruption cases associated with the COVID-19 pandemic have affected both countries. In Germany and Brazil, the purchasing of COVID-19 individual protection equipment and the roles of various politicians in the buying process of overpriced masks, for example, was discussed all over the media. This shows a bigger problem. While politicians may have a facilitating role in the purchasing process and are allowed to have additional income if they publish it, this can also be tempting to get a piece of the cut. Transparency of the whole process is key and highlights one of the main elements in the fight against corruption. In the case of Germany, for example, the discussions around the so-called mask deals had a massive impact on the recent elections in Germany.
In this regard, public opinion often flares up when we talk about corruption, mostly due to an unmoralistic component of the Corruption Act. The task of fighting corruption sounds too big for a single individual, and therefore, many expect the rise of a saving power that will both clean public administration and avenge the people. Unfortunately, we don't have heroes in real life. We need, however, to find realistic and sustainable ways to fight corruption, but also to measure often the unknown. With this in mind, public data is not only a way to hold governments accountable, but also an important tool to help public bodies, the press, and civil society to investigate public activities and ascertain accusations against public administration. Information, data, and transparency are an important strategy in order to fight corruption. And today we have three special guests to talk about this with us. And usually we talk about who is from Germany, who is from Brazil, but today this is a little bit mixed up. But before that, I would like to introduce you again to Mara Mendes, who is co-moderating this episode with us. She's a Master of Science, a specialist in corruption, and also a PhD candidate here in the Institut für Politikwissenschaft in the University of Münster.
Pleasure to be here with you again, Jessica.
And from Brazil, it's my great pleasure to introduce the Master of Arts, Juliana Sakai, Chief of Operating Officer at the Brazilian anti-corruption NGO Transparência Brasil. Juliana holds a bachelor's degree in international relations from the University of São Paulo and a master's degree in political science from the Leuphana Universität in Lüneburg, here in Germany. In the last 9 years, Juliana has worked in the field of corruption fighting, leading projects on public transparency, social participation, and accountability. She also represents Transparência Brasil as a civil society member in government and multilateral forums and international, national, and subnational level, such as transparency councils of the Brazilian Office of the Controller General, Brazilian Senate, and São Paulo's state government. Welcome, Juliana.
Thank you, Jessica, for this very long and nice introduction. I feel very honored to be here talking to you.
And today from Germany, we receive Dr. Bianca Vaishmondu. She holds a PhD in governance from the Hertie School in Berlin, in Germany, and she has previously contributed to research activities in the EU-funded project Anticorp at ERCAS, together with Professor Dr. Alina Mungiu-Pipidi. Her research interests include evidence-based anti-corruption approaches and the relationship between democratic accountability institutions and corruption. Besides her academic experience, she has worked in a number of government monitoring projects, also with the NGO Transparência Brasil, where she was recently elected to the board of directors. Welcome, Bianca.
Hello, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, might I add, we're particularly happy today that Bianca joined us. She has been struggling with her voice, so we all know this is going to be quite a challenging hour for her. But we're really happy that you made it today.
Yes, I'll do my best.
So
yeah. I have the pleasure of starting the discussion today with the first question, which I would like to direct to Bianca. Since Bianca has been doing research and a lot of work to find new evidence-based approaches of measuring corruption, we're very curious to know what you think are the most promising ways to measure corruption.
Yes, I mean, to start, of course, we know that the underlying problem is that corruption is such a hidden phenomenon that is difficult to observe and, of course, to measure. So that's the main challenge that everybody faces when trying to come up with an approach. And what we have for a longer time that is more established and for which we have, for instance, data available for many countries for over, I think, 2 decades now, are what are known as perception-based indicators, where people actually use several existing surveys where experts and business people are asked about how they see corruption is the situation of corruption in their respective countries where they work and are active. And based on those opinions, there are these indicators that aggregate several of these surveys to sort of reduce the noise, the differences that people might have in these opinions, to come up with a figure that we can then compare countries, for instance, on what would be a level of perceived corruption. Of course, this has some challenges of its own in using this type of source, but this is what people have, let's say, for a longer time had in order to have an idea of how corruption differs across different countries in different contexts. Also, another approach that we have is a different type of survey where people are asked about their direct experience of corruption. So these are really experience-based indicators where people are asked, for instance, whether they have paid a bribe or were asked for a bribe at some kind of public service or some public institution. So this, you also have this type of approach, but of course this captures one part of the problem. So not everybody would have direct experience with any kind of corruption. So more high-level corruption involving top officials might be something that is not really captured by this type of indicator. And what I have personal experience with from my doctoral research are indicators based on, for instance, audit results. So you also have in research on corruption a lot of papers, a lot of literature using, let's say, real findings on corruption cases and trying to estimate then a corruption level from this type of material. So this comes a little bit closer to the actual phenomenon. So this is corruption that has been uncovered through state action and enforcement. I used, for instance, I was working with audit results from Brazilian municipalities on my research. There is a lot of literature also using this source on Brazil, and there are also from other countries similar sources. But then here we face the challenge of what kind of coverage can you achieve with this type of information, because data collection is very cumbersome and time intensive. So here it works for some purposes. It's an interesting indicator that comes closer to actual corruption, but you cannot really cover 100 countries and for a long period of time because this is difficult to collect. But what I see as a big innovation, really promising type of data that has been used in recent years, where I personally think it's a breakthrough in terms of research, but not only. I mean, it can also be used for other purposes. And it relates to some of the examples that you mentioned in the introduction, is public procurement data. By now, we have efforts of data collection from public procurement processes in different countries. Again, coverage is maybe at this point not so wide to compare with data that we have, for instance, from the perception-based indicators. But there you have really huge amounts of data available in a number of countries, where you can use technology and artificial intelligence to assess this data and create indicators, where you also come closer to the phenomenon of corruption in a field where it happens really very often, which is public procurement. So it's a very high risk area in public administration. And there I see really a lot of potential being realized already, and it can only increase as more countries open up data in this field. And we have interesting initiatives on open contracting to promote open contracting standards, and more countries or even local administrations join and adopt these standards. So I think this is a field where there's a lot of movement and with a lot of promising perspectives for measuring corruption.
Thank you very much. That has been already a really great overview of, well, not only ways to measure corruption, but also its importance to do so. So maybe we can dig deeper into that a bit later. I think Jessica wanted to ask the next question, or?
Yeah, no, I was waiting for
You were like,
we are coordinated this. We are in virtual environment. This is a little bit yeah, we are facing challenges of recording this outside in only one environment, when you can actually go over each other. I have I have some questions for Bianca, but I was also would like to bring Juliana to this conversation. Transparência Brasil is an NGO which I had the pleasure to work for 4 or 5 years in my life, and whose mission is to promote transparency as social monitoring of public administration. So, Juliana, I would like you to explain to our audience the work of Transparência Brasil, and how are the main sources and type of information that enables the work of the organization. And if you could also share with us what you already achieved with this process of working with public data.
Well, Jessica, first of all, we had the pleasure to have you for 4 or 5 years. And it's always really nice to work with such great women like you and Bianca. Well, Transparência Brasil is an NGO, so it's like civil, it's a civic organization, civil society organized in order to promote integrity, transparency, and social auditing. So we have a great focus on fighting against corruption, and we do this mainly by bringing transparency, pushing for transparency in the government, and also promoting a more vibrant civil society. We understand that the information is important for us to understand what is going on, to make our points, to try to help designing policy, but it's also for people. It's also to elevate the discussion on government, on how the government is taking decisions, how the government is using public's money to to provide any service or deliver a policy, for example. So we have been working a lot when we have more than 20 years right now, and we have been fighting for a long period to for FOIA. For the we didn't have until 10 years ago freedom of information law. So we fought a lot for a freedom of information act. And since we got this law enacted 10 years ago, we have been using it a lot to get information. So what there are some information that are public, and we use this information that there is already public to make our analysis, or we request further information of the government, or require that this information get transparent so people can use it and make its analysis and evaluations. So we have been focusing a lot on public purchases, for example. So as Bianca said, this is if you hear something strange in the background, this is my dog saying hello to you. Just for you to know. So we have a lot of information which is already publicly available, and this public purchases data is always there because you have legally, the governments are obliged to in Brazil to provide this kind of information. We analyze this kind of data to compare, for example, prices. Why a city is buying for such a much higher price for a similar product than another city. And we do this really using this data, but treating this data. And this is the main, and this part of treating the data is the main, is the huge bottleneck on this process, because you don't have interoperating data. You have data in different formats. Sometimes it's not even usable. So we spend a lot of time treating this data and incorporating it in a way that it can be used, in a way that we can compare things, in a way that we can say, oh, here this price is too much, and this is not how it should have been. So this is one area of like trying to open data that supposedly is already open by the government, in the federal government and in the local government. We also look, for example, to salaries and benefits of prosecutors and judges, and this is an elite of the public service in Brazil, and we are also immersed in scandals involving huge payments in the judiciary and the MP. We also have been monitoring service delivery, and this is like a new kind of data that we try to collect, because usually we ask people to help us in collecting this data. We promote a crowdsourcing, yeah. So we have these two kind of data. We have the data that we collect from the government, treat it, and try to compare and make either an analysis or a tool, platform, an online tool for people to dig into this data. So promoting this social auditing, or we have some tools that we would develop to make people provide us data, because they are there receiving or not receiving the service, the public service. So we want to check how is the quality of the service. Is there any problem? Is there some incorrectness, or something that is really wrong that may be connected to corruption, or maybe it's just connected to a bad government, bad ruling. Was it a bad purchase? Can we connect this bad quality to a bad decision on public purchase as well. So this is where we try to connect from the bidding process to payments and to delivery, yeah? And we try to monitor all this flow. But in a broader sense, we have been also looking for other information, for example, algorithmic transparency. We have been developing models and AI models and machine learning models to help us analyzing data, but we also have been monitoring how government is using this, because for us, it's important that at the end of the day, the public can trust a model that will regulate how a policy may work and may impact how a citizen will receive or not receive a public good or a public service, for example. So there are transparency is this transversal aspect in the government where we can, at the end of the day, work with different thematic areas, from public nursing being delivered or not as public works, constructing works. If we are looking at which kind of system, AI system, is being used for any reason in the public service, how the salaries and benefits of the judicial system is being paid, how in which level. So we can, at the end of the day, partner and try to provide and push for more transparency in a lot of different areas that will impact the citizen and the public good in general.
Well, thank you very much for the explanation, Juliana. It's so, I could not stop thinking some of these projects, of course, I know because I was there, but also I was thinking about the literature of fighting corruption. And yeah, there are some authors who emphasize a strategy of fire alarm, which is when service and delivery is not being made, the public, the citizens must set up the alarm. And it's so funny that sometimes the administration doesn't have a channel to send the alarm, and how the NGOs also need to do that, need to create or at least raise awareness of this need of creating a way to set the alarm. This is with service and delivery with school meals. Is one of these cases, because sometimes we have in a local level or in a specific level, okay, we have someone to complain, but if we are talking in a broader level, we don't have this. We as citizens, I mean, there is not always this channel. So I think it's really interesting how Transparencia works in the two-way round, not only top down, but also bottom up. And actually, there's a lot of questions coming. I want to state one question, and then I'm going to read one of these questions that are coming here. So Bianca was talking earlier about the strategy of using public procurement data as a way to find corruption, or I imagine, Bianca, that we are talking about fighting corruption evidence, right? And I would like, if it's possible, to talk a little bit more about it. And I would like to share an experience that Mara and I have here in Germany. We try to look in the procurement, data procurement from COVID-19 related purchases here in North Rhine-Westphalia. And we had similar problems that we had in Brazil. I mean, sometimes the data is not so well structured. Sometimes there is lack of important information from one or other really important cities. And at the end, the work was not as straightforward as we wanted to. So I would like you, if it's possible, Bianca, to state how is this procurement data in Europe, in your experience, how if there is a more structured, or do we have the same constraints everywhere?
I think that in Europe, in general, at the country level, you do have common standards that make this a little bit easier. So I know, for instance, there's a project that ECAS was part of, and there's a platform that is accessible with data on all EU member states and also some additional jurisdictions, including EU organizations. It's called opentender.eu, and there you can access data that is gathered from, but this at a country level, right? So there you can compare countries and you can see what is available, because I think, as far as I know, there are common requirements as how data is supposed to be published. And so there you have some kind of uniformity that makes this type of analysis a bit easier. But in your experience, you're looking at subnational level. And then I am not familiar specifically with the provisions in Germany on for the state level, the Länder level, how it works and what the requirements are. But there, as farther you go down the ladder of administration, there you get more variation, and especially in federalist systems, units have more autonomy and they can do things maybe in ways that differ, or it ends up being this way because it is difficult to implement certain standards at a very disaggregated level. So there, I think it's more common that you face these challenges. So this type of, let's say, common treatment of data, making data understandable and comparable in a way, is something that usually comes more from the top than from the bottom, right? So you need to have some effort of trying to make things uniform, which usually happens when countries, like, for instance, federal governments, are interested in using the data themselves for enforcement purposes, for investigative purposes, or for efficiency analysis, right? So if I guess the incentives to have better data come more for when governments really want to use the data themselves to improve public policy in general in several fields, and then you may have a movement to really improve the quality of data so that it can be better used. But if you don't necessarily have that type of movement, then sometimes you have data available because there is some either requirement or still some understanding that data has to be published, but it is sometimes difficult to use. So you have a lot of work necessary to make it understandable and really treat it in a way where analyses are meaningful.
And I have two questions here. I'm going to first take the questions from Mervi Atis. I'm curious about the audits in Brazil. I wonder if the content explicitly refers to the term corruption and how the findings are presented officially in this report. For example, are terms like public loss or irregularity are officially used in those reports? This is a question from Merv Atis, if I said this correctly.
Well, from my experience, from my research, the audits usually, sometimes it's interesting. Part of my thesis even deals with the fact that let's say the findings are portrayed in different ways. So sometimes the same type of situation is, let's say, portrayed in a much more direct way with terms that are more directly related to corruption, and sometimes like embezzlement or things like that. And sometimes they are a little bit more neutral in the description. So this was something that I also had to interpret and take into account in the data. So there is variation because in the end of the day, you have like actual people, auditors, hundreds or thousands of them, and they are looking at different locations and assessing things. And there is some variation in how the result of that work comes out. So this is also not very uniform, and you really need a lot of work to interpret this data and code this data and make it something that is even quantitatively analyzable. Yes, that's a challenge.
Thank you, Bianca. We have another question from one of the viewers. Maybe that's also a question to Juliana. So the question is whether the Brazilian government has been concerned about providing public transparency to encourage social control and democratic participation.
Joanna, maybe reply. I think maybe you can contribute.
Yeah. So looking back in the past in a macro vision, we have seen a lot of efforts of making transparency better. We have, as I mentioned previously, the Freedom of Information Law was passed, and it enabled journalists and other civil society members to get a lot of information. But it's always, of course, not one direction movement, because while in government, people in power also want to hide things that they are doing wrong, or that may be a source for criticism, right? So we have a lot of information being hidden, and there is always been a dispute with some agencies, especially related to public safety, to external relations, the diplomacy, and now we have been having a lot of in the presidency. We also have been facing this kind of, this is Brise saying hello to you, and we have a lot of this presidency information being hidden as well. So we as what I want to say is that we have a lot of setbacks all the time, and we have always to fight against the opacity. And particularly now, we have been facing a lot of problems with data, not only in social environment field that has been directly attacked by the government, but also in fields like education, or even like data that we used to have published is suddenly under protection of the GDPR, of the Brazilian GDPR, you know. So we have been having the setbacks a lot, and it's a little bit like democracy. You have always to be standing for it, because there will be always the interest in hiding information. So that's why you need civil society and media strong and vibrant to push for this when the times are more authoritarian, like what we're facing right now.
And I mean, if I may add, what is interesting, maybe I think Brazil is an example, and maybe I can introduce a little bit what we have been working on more recently at ERCAS, is a transparency index, also collecting data on real transparency in 130 countries, and Brazil is one of them. And we also have looked at other countries where you see, for instance, that sometimes there is an effort in the past to increase transparency and make more information available. There is great infrastructure that is created, but at some point this is not maintained anymore. So data is no longer updated, and things just sort of fade a little bit, because either there's some change in power where the political will is no longer there, or maybe in I have the impression from other countries that we have assessed for the transparency index, in countries that rely a lot on donor support, maybe financial support sufficient to maintain this data collection and publication is no longer sustainable. So I think this is also one of the challenges, not only to have increased corruption, increased transparency, and provide more data, but to have this also in a sustainable way over a long period of time, so that people can rely that this data is there.
This also makes me think a little bit of strategies, right? Because if one situation that I saw a lot is when you have an administration, mostly local administrations, and they don't have enough personnel or enough money or enough knowledge to make everything open in a way that we would like to. And I would ask, it would be interesting to know in your point of view, and then I include Mara also in this question. What do you think it would be the main strategy? Okay, if we just can have some things open in a way that we want to avoid corruption and mismanagement, what this data would be and how it would be, because there is also, I'm sorry, I'm going to make another line of thought here. There's also a big difference between information and data. This is a lot. Mara and I, we were discussing this while preparing this episode. So one thing is to have information. This is good, but data is something that is actually, the information is not only a fancy name for information, but it's information that can be worked. So there is a difference also here. So I would like to know from your point of view, what you would stress. Okay, if we could not do anything else, this would be our main task. Whoever wants to answer this first.
I mean, I can just bring up a little bit about this very new initiative that we have with the Transparency Index. I mean, I invite everyone who's watching to check it out on www.againstcorruption.eu. It's the T index. And there so the idea behind it is that transparency, or like we consider transparency the availability of information, so not data as you mentioned, but information, because we are considering what is relevant for the individual. So not always this information is going to be able to be treated and used in large-scale analysis by researchers or by or let's say by civil society or by journalists. But at the level of the individual, it's important that people have access to information that is relevant to them in different domains of their lives, and that this is freely accessible. So this is what we look at, and we have a sort of questionnaire with 14 questions covering different areas. For instance, fiscal transparency. So how are governments publishing data on past expenditures and also current expenditures? So is there a budget tracking tool that allows people to know what government is spending right now, or maybe from last month? So something that is really updated. They understand how the government is spending money, and how are governments, for instance, that donate funds to other countries, or countries that receive aid. How is this money being used, and where does it come from, and where is it going? And for instance, there are other areas as well that do not have to so much to do with public funds, but are also relevant information also to fight corruption. For instance, how is land registered? Is information on land registries and titles available? Can I know on a property who owns that property? Because this also is relevant for people to even protect themselves from abuse, because maybe if you don't have a title of your property, or if these records are not easily accessible, maybe there is also fraud, and people can try to sell your land and you end up losing from it. So there are all sorts of corrupt dealings also related to land transactions. And for instance, business information on enterprises, the business register, do you know who owns a company, who are the shareholders in a company? And this is also a field that is very relevant, related to public procurement as well. Who are these companies that are participating in tenders? Who are their owners? And also related to money laundering and offshore accounts. And this is data that is relevant in so many areas that touch upon corruption and several related phenomena. So we really checked information available in these different areas according to certain requirements, where we understand, okay, at least this type of information has to be available, visible, accessible without a cost. So I don't have to pay extra to have access to the record of a company to know who the shareholders is, but there's a database where I search the name of the company or even the name of the person that I'm interested in, and I can see where they're registered. So this is where what we're looking at, and I think it's something new. It's something it's now out there and available for people to see and contribute. People from the countries that are covered in the index can also reach out to us with additional information if there is maybe a source of information that we didn't identify in the survey that we conducted. So it's something really that we now appreciate having feedback on. And I think it's nice to have as an innovative view of these minimum requirements of information that people care about and that affect their lives directly. And to think really about transparency, not just in terms of what the law establishes, but how it really touches upon people's lives. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this discussion about information and data, it's really is very related to who is the people you are providing the data, so the information, let's say, because you can have data literacy or not. You may prefer have open data to make your own analysis, or you would prefer, if you're a citizen and you're not data literate, to have a tool where you can search for the information you're looking for. So just as example, what we have been doing right now with the salaries of judges and prosecutors, there is such a tool from the National Council of Justice that provide this kind of information. But you have to search for one specific month, one specific tribunal, and analyze this and download this information and repeat this this procedure to get open data. Yeah. So for our use, for our analysis, we want to have a huge information, a huge databases on these payments. But it was made the tool was made thinking on the citizen. If there is this tool, is there open data databases? Yes, of course, because this is where the source comes from, right? But it's not published. So a lot of our efforts is trying to get things that exist, data that exists, getting published. And there are some difficulties, as Bianca said, regarding in Brazil, regarding to business information, to who owns a company, and so that you can use this data. But the information on public purchase is available. So you have to, a lot of time, cross this different data, try some databases, work that some database get public so that you can use it, and cross the information and cross the data to get an information. So the information is depending on who is using it. So it's really what you need for, we talk a lot about data because we will at the end not only have a tool. We foster open data because at the end we just don't have a tool in which which was thought about someone, designed by someone for a specific use. You open the possibilities of creating other uses, of creating other tools, and doing your own analysis, right? And I think this is the most interesting when you can actually, with much less data than the government, produce similar analysis as we have been doing with social auditing, in projects like Obra Transparente, which Bianca worked at. So we really had to push for more transparency, to get the contracts informations in details as we wanted, in order to make similar evaluations that the government could have done. But the government's too small to audit everything. So it needs to have the support of the civil society to get things more transparent and to promote integrity. But I don't know if I skipped your question actually at the end.
No, I think I let Mara say something, but it didn't skip my question.
Well, I think I wanted to just add to this because it's both really interesting and relevant. I mean, Jessica and I were also discussing, yes, exactly what you guys said. The information is more that what the individual needs to know, and then the data is for those who actually do the big analysis. Then we thought of examples of where we would say, hey, in the UK, they publish a lot of data and it's really nice. You know, you can go to the National Health Services website and you can create your own, at least little table, if not visualization, it depends. And then we were wondering who does that actually, and wouldn't that person be also able to do that with a CSV file and be more flexible, because, you know, there's not so much flexibility in those websites where you can create your own. Yeah, so that there was always the question, who is it for and what do we need? And actually, for me, it oftentimes coming back to the procurement data, it comes back to, well, if you would ask me, I would like to see the information available in one site where I could see it, where I don't have to dig where's the information and have to go to 5 different websites because I have to drag it together. It should be available and it should be easily for me downloadable in a format that I can work with. So that comes back to CSV then. And then I want to be able to link it to other data. For instance, in procurement or in purchasing processes, it's really hard in Germany to link all data available to one specific procurement process. So it gets messy because you know you have the announcement and then you have the tender and the award, and you have to drag all this together. And sometimes one has been already taken down from the website and the other one is still there, and then you don't know, can I be sure that's the same process, and is this really the company who got this or not? And so it comes to also being able to get cleaner data and data that is easier to be compared. And of course, the information for citizens should also be available because that's a public duty. But I think that digging deeper into this, we are already in a specialized area of people who are able to make or to create new information with the data available, like you do it in Transparencia Brazil. You take the chunk data and you create something that maybe the government could also create, but you're closer to the citizen, and why not create information that the citizen needs?
I mean, if, just adding a little bit, just as food for thought, I think in the end, for instance, it's very costly for an organization as Transparência Brasil to do this. And the government has a lot of more resources. And then because it is low cost for the government to dump big data sets on an open data website, and people can access it, and it's great because then a lot of people can do different things with it. But then if we actually want government to provide data in an accessible and understandable way for the individual, then they also have the burden of treating the data and making it really processable in a tool, which is a huge chunk of the work. So, and I think it's also important that we keep that in mind, that the government also takes up their role to make the data useful, and not just because then in the end, the marginal cost of doing both, if you have a tool, if you provide a way of people of accessing the data in a meaningful way for specific thing that they care about, but then you also publish a CSV file, it's not much more in terms of costs for the government, but then you have both options, and then actual people and individuals who need a specific information and cannot handle a big file to dig into it and find what is relevant to them, they are also covered, and they also find what they need. So I think that we should consider that both things are to be expected for a government if we want a high standard of transparency, actually.
I would like to. Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
Just to quickly add to this, I didn't mean for basic information not to be available, but just the in between. I would say it's an in between service that you can create your own visualizations with it, and that I thought is maybe not as necessary as having the basic search functions that you need, but also the download, of course, because I agree totally with you. Oftentimes the government uses civil society organizations to actually do their work at a cheaper level, and that's also not okay.
Yes, I agree.
I have some comments to do about this because I made so many notes here. First of all, I need to say that I like the perspective that Bianca brought when she mentioned the againstcorruption.eu project about information as also a way to know our rights. This is something that Mara mentioned, not here today, but when we were discussing this episode, the information is a way to know your rights. So usually I'm more in the, because of my experience also, I'm always in the way like, no, let's make everything open and, innovation. And but there is also, so maybe this both strategies, right? So for a few things, we do have to have a visualization or facilitated visualizations for the common citizen, because I think that is also a trade-off, right? Because if we're always reaching the final citizen, we might not be able to write information, and then we have the problem that Juliana was mentioning. Okay, we do need to do all the work again in order to make a bigger analysis or see the bigger picture. But we can also not forget that there is a citizen that at least a few things, well, I'm not saying a few things in a way to not make it important, but I mean, there's a set of information that we need that the citizens have access, regardless of their level of expected data literacy. So I like that Bianca brought this question, this issue back to the conversation. And I really I was noting here when we were discussing, there is a lot of UX problem. I will resume in a way that it seems to me that sometimes the transparency follows the idea or the degrees, the whatever, how we call it, the public administration. It doesn't follow the idea of who is going to use the data, but it follows the idea who produced the data. And this is a really big consequence of a non-data driven way of work. And the state is a very old institution. So even considering that we had a few reforms, and of course, for example, Brazil is a democracy for a little bit longer than 30 years. And there were also in the same time bigger reforms in German state, but we still don't have a data-driven culture. And I would add to that it's I read recently the modification, the project of law here in Germany that modifies the eGov Gesetz and created the Datennutzungsgesetz, both here in 2021. And I don't remember in which one of them. I think is in the eGov Gesetz. There is like now a paragraph that says somehow governments, the public bodies must produce data already in a data-driven way. They must produce data in a way they can make it digital and et cetera. So this article, I can research it better later, but it says like, don't produce this in paper and then scan it, but already produce in a way that you can make it transparent. And I thought that this was an advance, although it's still so broad. I remember in Brazil some guidelines in this regard, but I don't remember this being into a law. I might be wrong, Juliana. If I'm wrong, you correct me. But I think this is also already a step towards what we need, which is okay. We need to be able also to drive outside in innovations. My last comment, I promise I will stop speaking, but but also what Bianca said, and now at the end, like what is the cost for civil organizations to do all this work? But why governments cannot adopt these outside in innovations? Those innovations that are created outside governments. Why cannot develop this together? And I just think that in Brazil we have some examples of this being made, or at least public civil society partnership in which, okay, maybe the knowledge or the way, the innovative part of it is outside the government, but they are working together, right? So, I mean, why cannot incorporate those innovations? That's all.
What you mentioned now, I think, I don't know, I would like to hear your opinion on it, but it's a point that I mentioned earlier. I think that in the end, you end up having the best efforts, the best initiatives for transparency and good quality data when the government itself is interested in using itself that data, because then it makes the effort from the beginning to generate the data in a way that will be useful. So I think that countries where you have somehow developed in the last maybe decades, the culture of more evidence-based policy to really collect data for improving public policy in general, I think this has been more successful to promote transparency as well. And where you don't have this, then everything is much more difficult and uncoordinated, and you end up not having quality data from the beginning, and things are sort of made available as an afterthought. So this is also difficult. And I mean, in principle, data is important also for the government itself to just know how policies are being implemented, the results, to evaluate things. And I think this has to do, transparency has to do also with this larger discussion on how governments handle all of this, their need of information, and how they work with providing information for their own needs, and not just the citizen, which of course is important, but then as the better governments respond to their own needs of having good information, the better are the outcomes in terms of transparency, I have the impression.
And this is a point where we come to, so if we don't have data on implementation, on policy implementation, this shows us that actually government is not interested in doing policy evaluation. They are doing policy, implementing policy, but they are not thinking about collecting data to evaluate at the end. And this is a huge problem in Brazil, where you have over 5,000 municipalities implementing federal government policies. And you have like subnational government using federal money, and the federal government does have no idea what they are doing with this money. And at the end, we also do not know, or we know just partially what is going on, because it's really hard to track, right? So one of the efforts we have been doing with public purchase is trying to understand how money from public, how to say, school meals, right? From that were supposed to go to schools. How are they being used by municipalities? What they are buying, in which quality, from whom? And then you're supposed to open 5,000 different transparency portals to get the data. And of course, this is impossible. And I think these are the kind of bottlenecks we have that is really related to, actually, the government's not really thinking. At the end of the day, you can have no other conclusion. They are not really interested in evaluating this. At least they don't do much to not even oversight this, né? So to promote the oversight. So the federal agents, which is responsible to finance this policy, they don't know as well. They also don't know.
Yes, I think you're right. And just going back to my experience with the audit documents that I analyze, there you see that this is done also through the audits, but this is done at a much later point, and only on a sampling, on a sample. So you don't really have a systematic way of evaluating this. When these audits look, for instance, at the quality of school meals, or how the results of the policies are actually, then it's also a very restricted way of assessing this at all, and it ends up being in a format that is also not very useful for people to understand it in a very easy way, because there's also 100 pages reports that not a lot of people are going to read in detail to find specifically how certain policy in some municipality was assessed. So again, you have this, you don't have a sort of coordinated effort to think about the information for the different purposes, as from where it can be generated and serve then the government in other areas. And then it will also be easier to make it available to the citizen to also understand it and know what's going on. So it's in general, I think it's interesting to think about it in a larger way, that transparency is embedded in let's say a more complex thing on how governments can handle data.
Great, thank you. Actually, there's one viewer that wants to have some hands-on or more hands-on information from both of you, I guess. Vicente Monteverde wants to know what current big data tools are there for corruption prevention. What do you see as big data tools out there?
I mean, what I know from some examples, as I mentioned, the type of analysis that is done with public procurement data, I mean, there is at the EU level and some other jurisdictions the open tender portal, but I don't know if there's any other similar tool extending a larger area with similar data. But there are I know that there are similar efforts at in certain countries, and there I think you really need people to have some good level of data literacy to be able to work with this data, and then you can do a lot. You can even see, like, if you have really granular data on procurement, if you know the companies that are participating in these procedures, if you can cross that with the Register of Commerce and the enterprises data, then you can really do social network analysis and identify cartel structure, and like do a lot of interesting things where you see a lot of red flags for corruption and how things can be manipulated in this area of government. But there, I think the barrier for using this data is quite high. So I don't know what the purpose is in mind of the person who asked the question, but for people to engage with this data there, it depends really on the quality of portals that governments make available. I mean, in some states in Brazil, you can search the data and you have more detailed information. I think for electronic procedures, you do have full data also at the federal level. So you can do searches, and you cannot easily aggregate the data, but you can see very detailed information on specific procedures. So if you're interested in a specific purchase or in a specific type of product or service that is purchased, then there are some tools from specific governments where you can find a lot of information on it. But to really now it occurs something to me that they do in Brazil even, and they do it at the federal level. They do use the oversight institutions have artificial intelligence tool that monitors this data, monitors even the texts of announcements. So there they do a lot in terms of prevention, because they can flag potential irregularities. They can flag, for instance, specifications in the announcements, in the terms of reference, that may restrict competition. So this is a very interesting initiative that I know from Brazil, which is being employed at the federal level currently, that works well to prevent corruption. But I don't know to what extent this type of work is also applied in other countries. So I only have this knowledge from this Brazil example.
Yeah, I wouldn't have examples outside Brazil as well, because we are really devoted to promote transparency in Brazil. So, but for those who are interested, you can check out the official, either the official government websites for open data, or you have also organizations like Brazil.io, which do a little of service for us to in cleaning and preparing data and extracting some specific data that you otherwise would need a lot of time to and a lot of space in your device to download and treat. So this can be very useful for those working with Brazilian data. And it seems like it's easy. You can download all the information of public purchases, of payments as well. But and then what you have sometimes is like some bizarre stories that the federal government bought thousands and thousands of millions of condensed milk, and nobody knows exactly why and what for, and this cannot be right, but it's there on the data. But it's just to show how difficult it is to produce or to provide correct information. You have a lot of money invested on these transparency portals, and even journalists can get it wrong sometimes, because it's not their fault. If we are talking about user experience, and journalists cannot understand what's going on, it's just like you're doing something really wrong. And we have been really for months trying to connect different database of the federal government to say who joined a bid for determined agency, and who got it, and when it was paid, at what price, and make it the information useful to public that wants to do social auditing on public purchase. So it's you have all these websites, and you have these portals, but it's really a lot of work. I have a meeting this afternoon here with the Ministry of Economy and the Comptroller General Office to see if I can get a little bit better, if I can understand a little bit better the data. But they are doing a lot of work to provide us.
I think related to this point that Juliana made, it's worth mentioning that there is an international effort to make how to say, like, spread specific procurement publication standards, the Open Contracting Partnership. And I think it's interesting for people to know that, I mean, in terms of strategy, I think it would be a good strategy for people locally to push for governments at different levels to adopt these standards, because this would already make things a lot easier. So this may be an example of initiative that already exists with a certain set of standards that's already being promoted and has already been developed. It's already implemented in a number of countries, also by subnational governments, and it's something that I think would be a huge impact in terms of quality of data and in public procurement if more governments adopted. So for people who want to do advocacy in this area, I think it's something worth pursuing and knowing about. Because this would, of course, reduce a lot of the problems regarding this type of data.
Thank you. I think to just summarize this quickly, it's maybe what Vicente had in mind is there like a fancy tool, something to grab, something hands-on? And I think to summarize, it's more about the information published. When we talk about tools, we mainly talk about portals, which obviously doesn't sound as interesting and as fancy as we would wish, but it's a way to get the information and data that we want and need, and it is available online to everyone, and should probably be readable to everyone. And then, as also Bianca said, there's a shift. I mean, technology, advances, and we're getting to a point where artificial intelligence will help, and where we probably in the upcoming years will see more fancy big data tools that can emerge. But we need that information that is published, as also Bianca was saying now, and also Juliana, we need it to be unified. We need a standardized version of the data that is published.
Yes, I think, I mean, we need to keep in mind that the fanciest methods and the fanciest artificial intelligence tools can only be applied with good quality data. So this goes back to the original problem of where this data comes from. But if we think then from the perspective of the individual, it can make a difference from the individual to have a rudimentary search tool to just look for something that is of interest to them, and they find the information, even if they cannot conduct super sophisticated analysis and cross different information. So even that is very valuable. But of course, if we think about the potential of data in this domain, then really the sky is the limit. But then we have to really go back and think of strategies to ensure, or maybe have more incentives at the level of government to produce better data.
I think Bianca muted herself at the end.
I said in the first place, maybe I cut a little bit, but I was done with my
Oh, okay. We're going to reaching the end of our conversation, and I'm going to actually go back a little bit in the beginning of the talk, in which we were talking about, I mean, we just have elections in Germany right now. We are about to have elections in Brazil, although it seems like that we are having elections in Brazil since 2017. No, 2018 is a non-ending election that we are having there, or at least a non-ending campaign. And I might mention that I love that Leite Moça Gate was mentioned here today. And I just wanted to say that. But coming back to that beginning about this moralistic approach of transparency, and this was a huge thing in 2018 election. So I would ask all of us here in this panel, if transparency in the perspective of the citizen, if the perspective of the person who's going to vote is more than a buzzword. I mean, we could spend like 1.5 hours talking about many measures that the Bolsonaro government made to increase the opacity at the national level, things that were already established and are not established anymore. And although he has one quote that is also mentioned, he also mentions a lot, like transparency above everything. Like, it's just a buzzword, and it's easy to be a buzzword because sometimes we don't know what transparency is. I would like to ask you if this was if transparency, access of information, was a theme here in German election, especially Mara. I think we never discussed this so much. And if we see Bianca and Juliana in Brazil, do you feel that this discussion that we have about transparency pops the bubble outside of journalists and data and information activists, open data activists? If the WhatsApp group in our family are also discussing this?
Should I begin? Well, so I would say that it depends on how you approach the topics, right? If you ask technical questions about freedom of information law, people may not know. And the freedom of information law is for sure a tool of journalists and civil society who makes monitoring of the government. But when it comes to service delivery or things that will impact the real life of the person, they might need to search for transparency to understand certain things. For example, a mother who is in the line for a public nursing, how long must she wait? This kind of practical questions will link to the question if there is transparency or not on the line. How many people is this information published or not? So I think that people may not be aware of transparency because it's something that you just need to be aware of your right, as Bianca mentioned in the beginning. And you are usually most aware when you don't have this information. And sometimes people don't really understand. Some citizens may not know that they have the right to information. As this may seem to be technical, but actually they do have the right to know. And the right to know is a fundamental right. There is constitutional, there is it's a human right, and so. But at the end of the day, when it comes to certain rights and people being aware that they do have these rights, So they will have to know that they have the right to know as well.
Yes, I think it's really about awareness as well. I think that sometimes people are not aware that this can be so important to them and really impact their lives so directly. This is sometimes the case even with corruption. I think that people sometimes see it as something very distant from their lives because it is not always very directly communicated how their child is not getting a good meal or any meal because of corruption. So sometimes it's just about a top level politician stealing money to, I don't know, finance a yacht or something, and they don't really relate that to their everyday life. But I think also activists and the press can maybe make also communication effort to make this clearer to people, to make this connection, and also between transparency and their everyday life, how transparency can really impact them and how important it is. And so I think this awareness point is very important. In terms of the electoral context, it's difficult because these are questions, even corruption, although it's a very hot topic usually and very discussed in electoral contexts, it tends to become less salient than many other things that are also very important to people. So and I think transparency will rather fall into that category and be a less salient topic for people to consider. So I think that's why in terms of elections, it doesn't really get a lot of attention, or it has less meaning for voters, because there are so many things going on, especially now, and where other topics are so prominent and so polarized. So these are issues that tend to be less relevant for voters in this type of context. But I think a lot of work can be done to raise awareness that this is important, that this affects their daily lives.
I think I agree I agree with both of you. It's I feel that transparency when it comes to like the general public is oftentimes not as demanded because it's not clear what the benefits are. But actually just yesterday or over the weekend and today there was something, it's not linked to corruption, but it's to transparency and information transparency. In Germany, there were huge discussions on the vaccines that people would get, on the different kinds of vaccines. And just at the end of last week, our health minister said that now more people would get vaccinated with Moderna. And just today I read articles where it was explained, because the general public was feeling really insecure, because before that it was said everyone would get BioNTech, and then, although it's also an mRNA vaccine, people were really insecure what that was all about. And today there was more of a transparency campaign explaining exactly why the Minister of Health took that decision, that we had more of this vaccine available, and it was really not a matter with which vaccine people would get. But before that, because there was not enough transparency, people were feeling insecure, and actually because of that insecurity, not demanding more transparency, but actually that was what they really needed, to understand the whole situation. And I think that's the case in a lot of situations where people are fed information, and some information is lacking, and that kind of gap creates insecurities and a lack of trust.
I need to say that our time is over. I need to, first of all, thank you very much. I cannot stress how much I learned from you, Bianca, Juliana, and Mara, almost every day. Not every day right now because we're not seeing each other every day anymore, but the experience that I have with you, it's always not only a pleasure, but also really insightful always to have these conversations. Mara, would you like to say something as co-moderating today to finish
That was really enjoyable. I wish we would be sitting together, and I was actually hoping for more of this, tennis kind of thing. I play, you the ball, and you play me. It's a bit more challenging when you're not sitting in the same room. But it was really fun.
I would like to thank Juliana for being here today, and also Bianca for being here with us, especially consider that your voice, I think your voice was great. I hope you're not in pain right now.
No, it's fine. I just hope that people can understand and hear me well. So it's fine. I'm doing well. My water is over, but I'll get some more now. But I mean, thank you for the great discussion, for leading this, and it was a great topic, and I think it was really nice to exchange a little bit on so many sides of transparency and many aspects of it. So I also learned a lot from having this discussion with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jessica. It was really a pleasure to be here. I'd like to say seated here with you, but yeah, and there's the squares, and it's really nice to have this opportunity to talk to you and Bianca again, that I know for so much time, and to get to know Mara, and yeah, it was really nice. Thank you for this conversation.
And I would like to thank you who is watching us today for spending time with us. Data Talks is a series of talks between experts from Brazil and Germany, and today was a little bit of everything, Brazil and Germany at the same time, who discuss the use of public data in today's societies. The Data Talks is an initiative from myself, Jessica Vogt, as a part of the German Chancellor Fellowship from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, and is hosted and supported by the Brazil Center of the University of Münster in the framework of the Strategic Partnership VVU.USP, funded by the DAAD. I will see you on the next talk. Have a nice week. Goodbye.
Bye.